BlockStart is a European program. We are here to help small to medium enterprises specifically to enable them to get this new technology implemented in their systems. We offer free training programs to increase the awareness and the likelihood that you will adapt this technology. We additionally try to tailor these programs to your needs. So if you are from the poultry sector, then we will talk about poultry. If you are more into freight shipping, then we talk about freight shipping. To apply to the program, you can use the QR code on the bottom right of the screen right now, and it will take you to the website directly to fill in the form and to get going, basically. So once you have scanned that QR code, it will give you more information about the program, and you can reread some of the information that we will give you. Then you will be asked to complete a form, and this form will then be reviewed by a team of us that will determine if you meet the criteria. So why are we doing this, and why is the European Union doing this? Well, this is the technology that we're talking about is called blockchain, and this technology has a major impact, at least the European Union thinks so, and we agree, in all kinds of sectors, but specifically in logistics, it is a very upcoming trend, and we feel, and the European Union agrees, that the small to medium enterprises need additional assistance to try and cope with the implementation of the technology, specifically because they might not have the funds to implement these type of programs. They might not have the time to figure out what it does and how it can be useful for them, and well, they basically be busy with running the show. Besides from that, we do see a lot of interest in this technology right now. So I would advise you to get on board with this program so that you can you know, integrate with the existing chains that are coming up. So this program is set up by a lot of different partners. This means that we have a lot of experts in different types of technology and different types of adaptations to try and make this a reality. So we don't look at this from a technology viewpoint. We don't just look at it from a marketing viewpoint or just a logistics viewpoint. We look at it from all angles to try and give you a holistic view of the entire program, a holistic view of the technology to be implemented. And we can give you advice that is truly useful to you. It also makes sure that we don't have a commercial interest into trying to push you specific technologies or platforms to use. We want to create things that are useful to you and your entire sector without having a commercial gain into it. All right, so who am I? My name is Christian Verhoef. I work for the University of Applied Sciences in Windensheim. I work with supply chain, business, media, and law. And I am joined here today with Geoff Taylor from Chainpoint, and I'll leave the rest of the introduction of him to him.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. So I'm Geoff Taylor at work at Chainpoint, based in the Netherlands. We deliver software solutions to connect the information in supply chains together. So blockchain is one of the technologies that's relevant to what we do. And today I'll be explaining some of how blockchain works before Chris moves on to some of the more practical applications of blockchain. So basically, in every supply chain, you've got a number of streams. You've got a stream of physical goods that are traveling through the supply chain. You've got a financial stream, which is moving monies along the supply chain between parties moving up and down. You've got a stream of information which is flowing through the supply chain as well, such as information on transactions, traceability information, information on audits, the location of goods, and you've also got information on ownership as well. So for those of you who are familiar with concepts of chain of custody, where the ownership of goods is registered along the stages of the supply chain, then that's also an aspect that you see in supply chains. And it turns out that blockchain has a lot of potential for facilitating the financial stream within supply chains. Many of us have probably first heard of blockchain when we've heard of technologies such as Bitcoin, which is a currency which runs on top of blockchain. And although these kinds of currencies are still quite in their infancy, I think we can expect in the future that blockchain can really play a role in facilitating the moving of monies throughout the supply chain in a much more streamlined way. Supply chains are full of information, as I mentioned, and the blockchain is very well suited to taking information from various stakeholders in the supply chain and bringing that all together. And I will explain that more in just a moment. And the blockchain also has potential for recording the ownership of goods in the supply chain, such as the chain of custody that I mentioned. So when we see that as a whole, blockchain has real potential for supply chains, and the greatest potential is that you can take all these streams of information and you can put that all in onto one shared platform. So traditionally between IT systems, as I will demonstrate in this presentation, where you've had supply chains that collaborate together, but they've all got their own separate IT systems, then you're really talking in terms of information about what I call digital silos, just separate IT systems with their own information, and maybe some of that information is exchanged between parties, but it's not all on one real shared platform. And so you have challenges like data integration, conversion of data, reconciling data, and blockchain really alleviates a lot of those problems. So what does blockchain really bring to the table? I think there are at least three central pillars which are particularly relevant for supply chains. Firstly, blockchain has a large degree of security built into it. You're getting that out of the box. It's not like an afterthought. It's built into the technology. Blockchain makes very strong use of encryption, which in turn allows data to be stored in the blockchain in a way which is what we say is immutable, which means you can't go back in time and change it. And again, I will zoom in on that in just a moment. I think what else that blockchain is bringing to the table for supply chains is the idea of insight. When you've got multiple parties in the supply chain collaborating together on that same single blockchain system, it opens up more the possibility for transparency of data, being able to see, for example, vulnerabilities in supply chains, which is something that's been never more apparent than this year. There have been numerous supply chains who, because of the outbreak of COVID-19, have found out to their disadvantage that maybe their supply chain wasn't as fully mapped out and understood as they thought. And all of a sudden, when suppliers quite deep in the supply chain couldn't supply, it had a very real knock-on effect on their own ability to supply as well. And so by bringing more stakeholders on board into a system where you can get more insight, more into the sort of fuller scale of your supply chain, that can bring a lot of benefits as well. A blockchain is also a decentralized database. So we say there's this idea of a single record of truth. In other words, the same set of data is shared among all supply chain stakeholders. And I will touch upon that a little bit more in just a moment. So technically, a blockchain is a ledger. Actually, we all know what the concept of a ledger is if you think of your bank statement. A bank statement never has transactions sort of removed from it. It only has transactions added to it at the end of the bank statement. And that bank statement just keeps rolling on with new transactions and new transactions. And a blockchain is very, very similar. You can only really add data to the blockchain. A blockchain takes a certain amount of data, and when it's got enough data bundled together, it stores it into something that we call a block. So a block is one container for a collection of data in a blockchain database. And when that block is full, another block will get opened up and data can be added into that block as well, and so on and so on. And these blocks of data in the blockchain are linked together in sequence with each other. So what you've got is from the very first block that was ever created in the blockchain all the way to the most recent block which has been added into the blockchain. You've got a chain of all these blocks linked together to each other. So you've got blocks and a chain. Yeah, that's why it's called blockchain. What's interesting then is what blockchain does in terms of data integrity is when a new block gets written to the database, that new block will look back at the previous block in the blockchain, and a calculation is made between the two blocks based on the data as it stood at that moment in time in the whole of the blockchain up until the point that this new block was created. So if you look to the left, you can see this previous block that we had. That was the state of the blockchain up until the point that a new block was added. And a special calculation is made between each two blocks in the blockchain based on the data that's in the blockchain up until that point. That calculation between the blocks is used for integrity, and what's special about that is if you would go back and try retrospectively in time to alter some of the information that's already in the blockchain, the calculations just won't add up anymore. The calculations that were made based on the data how it was are no longer correct. And so with that mechanism, the blockchain can control the integrity of data in the blockchain. So in that way, data can't be removed or altered in the blockchain, which keeps the data integrity very high. What that also means, by the way, is if you would add a transaction to the blockchain which was not correct, you can't go back and remove it, but what you can add is a new compensating transaction which you could signal as a sort of replacement transaction.
A question from the audience, Geoff.
Yep.
Shen Yan, and I think this is a good moment to say it, asks, would data be editable by the data owner before it's locked up in the blockchain?
So basically, when you're committing data to the blockchain, you are really assuming then that data from that point on is really immutable. So you're committing data to the blockchain. You can't go back then retrospectively and change it. But what you can do is always add new compensating transactions to make amendments to data. The idea would be then that, you see, the whole point of the blockchain is you've always got a complete audit trail of every data activity that took place in that blockchain, and for that reason you can't go back and change it. So I hope that answers the question. Traditionally in supply chains, we've had what I earlier called these separate IT systems, which are like silos of information, which represent the data of a certain stakeholder or company in the supply chain. These are centralized IT systems, and it's very possible that a single company has information of their own supply chain actors, maybe some details of the traceability and chain of custody information that's relevant to them, maybe some audit information and information about users, and so on. And I guess one way to visualize the blockchain is a bit more like this, that if you've got multiple stakeholders on the blockchain, they've all got their own copy of exactly the same information. They can run it on their own IT systems. Those are called nodes in the blockchain. And the fact is, all of the information is synchronized across the blockchain so that everybody's got the same copy of the information, which also brings very strong data integrity and assurance to the whole of the blockchain. And I will zoom in a moment on a situation of how blockchain solves quite a traditional problem that we sometimes see in blockchains. So we say that a blockchain is decentralized. It's one single record of data for everyone. It's data which is shared among all the partners that are on the blockchain. And because of that, it has a real potential, I think, in the future to increasingly cut out a lot of the overlapping IT that the supply chain as a whole would have. So like I mentioned, you've got all these separate data silos, and if you would look at that across the whole supply chain, that's an awful lot of IT systems in place to represent the total data in the supply chain. If you could get all of that onto the blockchain, you can progressively cut out a lot of that overlapping IT and transition more to being on one blockchain system, which is shared by the supply chain. So to zoom in on this problem of trust that I just mentioned, when you've got separate IT systems, one of the potentials that we see is that imagine if you've got three parties, A, B, and C in the supply chain, and supplier A delivers to party B, and let's imagine that party C rewards party B for the amount of sustainable materials that they produce at the end of the supply chain. So when you've got all these separate IT systems registering things like transactions, movements of data, chain of custody, that sort of thing, there is the real chance that, for example, party A could export data out of their system, which would be imported by party B. And that would be, for example, details of the shipments that party A has made to party B. Party B, on the other hand, could make an export of their data to party C. Now, the problem with this is nothing's integrated. So it's really hard, for example, for party C to really verify what party A really delivered to party B, which can open up situations such as supply chain fraud, certainly in terms of sustainable claims, for example. So the blockchain helps to resolve that by having one copy of the data, which is verifiable across all parties. So you're opening up transparency. You don't have these separate IT systems anymore, where, if you like, the facts are centralized in each IT silo. No, everything's spread right across the blockchain for everybody to see with one single set of shared records, which means that there's much less chance of fraud and discrepancies in the supply chain, because now party C has transparency to see what data party A provided, for example. Just to touch on this, the technology in blockchain has come far enough that you could talk about some sense of controlled transparency. What I mean is, you could, a consortium on a supply chain could go as far as saying that they want everything to be transparent for everybody. But in reality, that's often not possible. Often in supply chains, you have parties that are competing with each other and don't want to see each other's data, for example. So you need an element of controlled transparency, and that's absolutely certainly possible in a blockchain. So you can decide what is visible to which parties and what is blocked from being visible to certain parties as well. And that needs a sort of consortium approach to decide on that sort of level of visibility for each party. So there's a lot of opportunities for supply chains. Supply chains can collaborate more. They can streamline processes by being on one single system of record. Things like orders would be immediately transparent to parties. Delivery information, payments, brings around a lot more efficiency. It can really drive costs down. In terms of securing the supply chain, things like digital documentation. Think of shipments, for example, where documentation can be added to the supply chain and it's already visible for certain customs checks, for example. So they can already maybe see that documentation ahead of time to speed up clearing shipments, for example. Chain of custody information. can be made more open and visible. Information such as certification can be tagged onto the blockchain as well. And there you get this really nice potential mix of traceability information combined with certification information, which is a little bit the holy grail that I think some partners in supply chains are looking for, where they want to be sure that the materials that they're really using are also certified. And by tying up the chain of custody information with real certification information in one digital system, it makes that much more possible to verify. Authenticity. Brands, because they have a much richer set of traceability information that they can verify, it brings about more brand protection. If you've got a company, for example, which is making certain claims that they use only organic cotton, for example, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to be able to prove it with your traceability information. And blockchain will make that a lot more possible as well, with all of the partners in the chain on the same IT system. We're increasingly having to deal with complexity in supply chains. Supply chains are becoming increasingly global. Supply chains are also becoming more customer driven. Customers are asking and demanding more of the brands that they buy from, certainly again in terms of ethics and sustainability, those sort of criteria. Along with that, governments are increasingly bringing about regulations and legislation to force supply chains to behave more ethically, to have more understanding about what goes on in their supply chain, to have understanding, for example, that there's no child labor connected on their supply chain, those sort of regulations. We're in a changing world where data is being needed to be increasingly shared between parties as well. So blockchain is in an ideal position to address this increasing complexity in supply chains. Some examples of some systems that are already up and running. I guess one of the most famous at the moment is IBM's Food Trust, which is operational. Started off with a number of major enterprise level stakeholders, and now also accepts smaller and medium-sized organizations as well onto Food Trust, so that supplies of food products can be more accurately traced. You can see real-time location information and so on. And that's an example of something already running on the blockchain very successfully. Other systems are in place for delivering digital documentation, paperless documentation, which can really speed up the process of having documentation at hand when you need it. Track and trace, something that Chainpoint's often quite involved in. The idea that at any point in the supply chain, you can really see where materials are. And that's going to increase dramatically in the coming years, when more and more sensors get deployed into the supply chain to see real-time logistical information. And although it's probably still in its infancy in terms of full-blown currencies that are used at the moment, probably with the exception of Bitcoin, we can accept that blockchains will be more and more involved in the future in financial transactions that are embedded into that blockchain as well. So it's not just information about traceability. You'll be able to trade on that blockchain that you're all integrated on as well. So there's real potential. McKinsey has defined this concept of supply chain 4, which is the idea that when I've talked about all these separate silos of information and data, the idea of supply chain 4 is absolutely to break those silos down and make everything a lot more overarching, a lot more integrated, so that data across the supply chain is immediately more visible. Data from all kinds of external sources can be integrated and monitored, such as weather forecasts and the effect that has on growing crops, and the effect that will have on producing supplies at the start of the supply chain, and so on and so on. Supply Chain 4 also anticipates a lot more automation in supply chains, which will definitely happen. IoT, Internet of Things, is becoming increasingly common, and what Supply Chain 4 is basically saying is, you'll have sensors everywhere throughout the supply chain. A massive increase in the amount of information that's made available to supply chains, but how do you then manage all of that information, and how do you get a more holistic view of that information? That's really where blockchain fits into supply chain 4 as the sort of back-end system that can be used for a supply chain for storing all of this information and making it broadly available to the supply chain. So in summary, a blockchain, in one sentence, a decentralized and immutable storage of verified transaction data. And I think that sums it up really well. It's decentralized, it's shared as a single copy of data among all participants on the blockchain. It's got strong integrity as well because it's immutable. You can't go back and change data. So it's got really strong integrity compared to other traditional ways of storing data for supply chains. That's the bit that I wanted to present. Chris, I'll move over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Geoff. That was a good explanation. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the state of this technology to start off with. So undoubtedly you have heard of this technology a little bit, at least in the news. It has been very popular. It is very important when we talk about new technology in general that we ask ourselves, what is the state of maturity that the technology is in right now, specifically for supply chains, because making mistakes is, well, deadly, especially for a supply chain, because the margins are very low, and if you make a mistake, you might not be re-invited, let's put it that way, for the next round for your products. So when we talk about blockchain specifically, last year it was what we see in front of us right now is the Gartner hype cycle. If you don't know, Gartner is a nice IT company that very accurately predicts a couple of trends, and they basically goes and they say that new technology basically goes through 5 stages that you can see on the graph. So the innovation trigger, the peak of inflated expectation, the flow of disillusionment, and the slope of enlightenment and ending in the flow of productivity. So any major technology, say the internet, has gone through this cycle where in the beginning everybody says, well, we're going to have all these connections between all these devices, and you're going to be able to talk to any person across the world within seconds and stuff like that, and it will be a global connecting force and stuff like that. But in the beginning it could basically send email, and it could send email very badly. So at the dot-com bubble, I'm sure that you remember this, the technology was completely overestimated what it could do at that specific time, and everybody thought we have to get in now before everybody else already got in, and at that time, otherwise you would be too late. The first mover advantage is also sometimes called. So blockchain had this moment pretty much last year where the technology was going to revolutionize everything. People said that it could be used for anything. Anything would be better with a blockchain. That might be true, but at that specific time, and well, in a lot of cases still, the technology is not ready for that stage yet. It is not all the bugs have been left out, not all the use cases have been properly developed, and not all technologies have been properly adapted. And this is why this program is also here to help you educate what can be done right now and what can it do for you. Let's put it that way. So when we talk about blockchain, it is now going through the throw of disillusionment. It is now, everybody is basically saying, well, it's not going to be the next big thing. Maybe it has to basically prove itself in order to reach the slope of enlightenment and the plateau of productivity. Basically, it has to prove itself, and once it does, everybody starts to hitch on the bandwagon. Now, the cool thing about this hype cycle, it's ever increasing, so it's going faster and faster. With each new technology, it builds on the previous technology, and the adaptation is faster. Blockchain is certainly one that is already taking the benefits of this, so it's moving faster into this, through this throw of disillusionment and enlightenment. And what we can see right now from current standing is, specifically because of the current events in the world, let's put it that way, that the adaptation is ever more increasing and it's ever faster. So So the amount of requests is also going up for this technology, which is very cool. As for blockchain for logistics, it is either now has been on the peak of inflated expectation, or it's now far beyond that. Of course, this is always a little bit of a guessing game. We don't know for sure, but definitely we know that there are a lot of different use cases that can be adapted to this, and there have been already a lot of pilots in the industry trying to tackle problems with this technology and trying to adapt it into that chain and how that can be useful. When speaking about that, so let's continue. So when we as a conglomerate, as parties, talk about blockchain, we look at a specific number of problems that you could have in the logistics industry, and you see 5 on the screens right now. So logistics, finance, process integration, track and trace, material passports, paper-based processes, and conditioned goods. And I would like you, the audience, to take the opportunity right now to put into the chat which problem is most relevant to you, so that we can talk a little bit more in that direction, because I have too much content to talk about to fit into this small webinar, so that we can go a little bit deeper into the concept, and we can talk about it. So so logistic finance, getting your money at the correct time, making sure that people hold themselves to agreements, stuff like that. Track and trace, where are my goods right now? When will they arrive? Prepare material passports, so which goods may transfer into what country and under what conditions. Paper-based processes, trying to digitalize paper documents that go along with freight containers, with your products into the digital area, where a lot of people will say, well, we can't digitize this, then it will be fraudulent and stuff like that. That's a very good case for blockchain, let's put it that way. Or conditioned goods, the idea that if you mismanage the goods, it becomes too hot, too cold, I throw it off the ship or whatever, it impacts the good so much that it becomes invaluable. Say, for example, a liver transplant, if the liver is mistreated, the liver becomes unusable for the medical sector. Or let's say a Dutch problem. So I have my potatoes in the truck, and it becomes too hot, and all the potatoes start to grow roots. Of course, then I cannot sell it anymore. But making sure that I did not become the cause of that, that's one of the problems. All right. All right, well, let's go with Shen. Okay, well, Shen says, challenge, paper-based suppliers, one system to meet regulatory buyers and certification requirements. All right, paper-based processes. All right, so when we talk about this right now, and this is a case that is coming up quite regularly right now, and this is also a very good case to talk about, we are looking at the challenge is it's very cumbersome for many partners to deal with all the different paperwork that they have to. So for example, if you have to go through a warehouse, one of the most famous concepts that have been rolled up by the Albert Heijn case is that they needed to have 3 signatures on a freight letter of freight in order to move their goods through their warehouse. Now, what happened is that people literally walked through the warehouse with their papers to each station to put an autograph on it, and then walk to the next station and put an autograph on it, and then to the next station. So people were basically walking for 40 minutes into a warehouse. Instead, what happens now is that the driver stays at the stays with the truck, basically has one scanning equipment, and the information travels through the different stations digitally. Each of the persons checks the information, sets an autograph, and the shipment can continue. This saves Albert Heijn 20 minutes of every shipment going through their warehouse. So this is a blockchain in their system that I have implemented only on their specific warehouse. It's not going anywhere else. It's just this small warehouse that they have implemented it, and it saves them 20 minutes of each truckload going in and out of that. That's a lot of money to Albert Heijn, which is very good. Okay, track and trace. Thank you, Stephanie. That's very good. Before, so what the problems here is that it might be different documents have regulatory standards. Say, for example, if I have potatoes, they are organic, considered in the Netherlands, they are considered organic, and I ship them to Greece. In Greece, there might be different standards for that regulation. It might not be considered organic. I don't know if this is true, but I know that there are a lot of cases where there are different standards for organic products, for example. Blockchain does not hold an inherent promise for this problem. This will have to be handled by a system that goes beyond it, basically. So it looks at the information and it says this standard does apply and this standard does not apply. So it is organic in Greece, but it is organic in the Netherlands. It is considered organic in Germany, but it is no longer considered organic in Greece. And then at least the supplier can know, okay, what do I need to do in order to make it compliant with Greece? Let's say that. This problem is something that we will have to tackle as an industry. This problem is something that it will require your help. The IT professionals cannot solve this problem because they don't know law. Luckily, we have, of course, a lot of experts that are dealing with this, but the more you say that this is a problem, the more we can help you implement solutions that will deal with that problem. So at the moment, we also think that these type of cases will have a medium disruption level, let's put it that way. However, at the moment, as we see it right now, there have not been a lot of cases around this that build proof of concepts dealing with this specific problem. So we do know that people want this. So as SME centrality is very high, we do know that people want this. However, at the moment, as we look at it around solutions logistical, there have not been many yet, which could be an opportunity here. Let's put it that way. Let's talk about track and trace. So Stephanie says, thank you for coming off of paper-based processes. Track and trace would be very interesting as well. So track and trace. When we talk about track and trace in logistics, it's often considered the holy grail. If you know the destination of your products and you know when they arrive, you can potentially optimize much better and try to make a lot of money that way. The blockchain definitely holds the promise for this. There have been many concepts already out there that are dealing with this specific problem. And we see the industry heavily moving towards this right now. So, for example, the Albert Heijn has a case in this specifically with these oranges. But I also know Maersk is trying to push one with different levels of success so far. But that doesn't mean that it won't work. It just means it needs more time. Or it could potentially, it needs more of the smaller businesses like you to be successful. So the cool thing here is that we're trying to see where products are coming from, and you can see that in the example app that I sent you right now. Right? It has a map into it, and what people will now say is all of a sudden, oh, why is it being shipped all across the globe like that? Why can that not be in a shorter range, for example? Or at least now we know that it's going that way. Maybe we can bundle products more to ship them in that direction. So at the moment, we foresee a very high disruption level because of these types of implementations. We see entire industries fighting for their competitive edge in this regard. The only problem or the point of attention, let's put it that way, blockchain and data sharing are not necessarily the same. So Shen previously said, well, what if I add can I still change information when I put onto it? Well, yes. No, you cannot. You can only add information, but what information you add to that chain, that's up to you. So it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody will share its data. That's something that you will have to agree upon yourself, or you have to make rules about. So, for example, if you scan this object, if you interact with this object, you have to add this type of information, maybe automatically or not, but you have to add the information. This could be things or solutions to that problem, and this is how the solutions at the moment, as we see it as well, being helped. So what the cool thing is here as well, this is very ready for automation. So because of adding this type of technology blockchain to it, it really opens the industry up for automatic shipment and automatic moving throughout warehouses. As I said with the Albert Heijn case, the driver no longer leaves the truck. He instead stays with the truck instead of moving through the entire warehouse. Similar cases have been seen across the world where now robots interact with each other and shipments move through a warehouse, robotic warehouse, and interact with this system in order to prove that they have indeed touched that system. Whereas before that would not be possible because information could always be falsified. It could always be whatever I say it is. And with this type of technology, you could at least trace it back to that machine, or trace it back to that moment. So if there was a mistake, you could at least say, okay, that's where the mistake is, or that was where the mistake was, and you can hold people responsible. And as a result, the incentive changes. Instead of thinking that you can get away with it and reap the profits, instead it becomes, I need to do good, otherwise people will find out, and I need to differentiate myself from my competitors. All right, so in track and trace, we're talking about provenance, we're talking about certification, we talk about consumer validation to make sure the concepts are including like I scan my coffee, maybe I can talk to the farmer, which is a cool marketing stunt. This is how you see it being used as well. And this involves not only blockchain, but it also involves smart contracts.
Chris, one thing we could address is a number of questions that are also coming in from people, which would be good to do, I think. Yeah, so maybe I can give an answer to the first one from Shen from a few moments ago. If I'm a mid-chain organization keen to utilize blockchain or Blockstar, is it only meaningful if my full chain participates? So I will give my opinion on that first of all. Simply said, I think the value of the blockchain becomes more apparent, and you extract more value out of the blockchain when more people participate on the blockchain. But even if you're a mid-chain organization, and even if you had some sort of blockchain relationship with partners that are maybe a couple of partners up and down the supply chain, you're probably already going to reap some of the benefits of having that information integrated, the automation that you get out of that, and that can be a good starting point. It's not necessarily a requirement that the whole full supply chain comes on board at one moment to get any value out of the blockchain. But in my opinion, the more participants there are, the fuller it is, you can get more value out of it. How do you see it, Chris?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, Geoff. So I specifically, Shen, as I said with the Albert Heijn case, so if you have it in a warehouse, it could already be effective for the simple reason that I can prove that the documents were signed correctly, which is the whole reason why we print them out and put a signature on them. Is the whole reason is that we have authority attached to them, and you cannot falsify that information. Well, yeah, okay, you can try to falsify an autograph, of course, but when you destroy the paper, it's gone. So similar, blockchain has similar properties. Whereas before, I could always remove the information again from the database and put something else. And even if I wouldn't do that because I'm a good Samaritan and I would never change that information, even though that's the case, the law would say, but you could if you wanted to, and therefore I will not allow that as proof. But with this type of systems, if you hook them into your system, you can prove that the information was not altered, and therefore it is verifiable. And we see this a lot in the Dutch government right now. They're really also implementing this left and right in all their systems, which is very cool. For the first time, you can digitize paper, basically.
Yeah, Chris, we've got a few questions stacking up, so let's just move on with some of these as well. So, Danny has asked, for what specific reasons blockchain projects are successful, or even more interesting, why do they fail? So just to give very quick feedback from my point of view on this, I think the reason we've seen many of them sort of fail, I don't know if we can even always classify it as a failure, or rather that there was just the decision that experimentation with the blockchain was only ever meant to be, in some cases, a proof of concept anyway, to gather more understanding of the blockchain, probably with not that much willingness to proceed so much further with that anyway, because it's in early stages. So in many cases, I think it's used more for a learning exercise. Nevertheless, yes, some journeys have absolutely failed. I think it's to do with maybe, to a certain extent, maybe inflated expectations of to what extent blockchain can solve every problem in the world, which it can't. If I look at supply chains, for example, let's be absolutely really crystal clear about one thing. The information in that blockchain will only ever be as good as the information you put into it. So, for example, although I've presented some situations today where I say that blockchain can be used to combat certain types of fraudulent transactions going on in the blockchain, the reality is at the start of the blockchain, at the start of the physical supply chain, at the input of the supply chain, one of the challenges we still have is that match still between what's going on in the physical world and what's going on in the information that represents that physical world, and how do you guarantee the integrity between the two of the things? And I've got to be completely honest with you, blockchain is not a full solution for that. You to a certain extent, certainly at the input side of the supply chain, you're relying on certain honesty as well. So maybe sometimes the expectations have been a bit high about blockchain. And I think the last thing is alignment. I think this is a big one. I've said it many times before. The more the more participants you have on the blockchain, I think you get more value out of it. The only problem is the more participants you have on the blockchain, the more you've all got to align with each other about what that blockchain is going to achieve, what information it's going to record. That all needs to be coordinated. And that's why, in my opinion, and I don't know how you see this, Chris, but to me, the best examples I've seen of blockchains really working well is when you've had a good, strong steering committee and consortium of participants working together to drive the development of that blockchain. And sometimes that alignment has just not been there.
Yeah, I have to agree. Cooperation is the one thing that makes it succeed or fail. So if I have a closed system where only I enter information, you could still ask questions, and people do, on how valuable the information is. So if take the Albert Heijn case, because we've talked about it a couple of times, if they were also the owner of the system, then it doesn't make any sense. But they weren't the owner of the system. The system was managed by a third party, and therefore they could not influence the information anymore after it was added. But for example, something that's failed spectacularly, which is the Maersk version. Maersk tried to implement its own chain. Why did it? Well, not spectacularly. Why did it fail? Because it failed to get cooperation from all its sub-partners to add information to its system, because they understood that Maersk also owned the system, and therefore it would own all the information that was added to the system and not necessarily share that information with everybody in the chain. So if you do not agree how you're going to cooperate, if you do not have agreements on how information is put back, if that's not included in the system, similar with the app, if it's not included that the farmer, after adding that information, can actually see the information once it reaches the end point, why would the farmer engage in this information other than maybe did you directly pay him for it, which would already be a good incentive for him to do? But to demand the information in any other way, that would be that's a way that it fails. So when we're talking about these systems, it needs to be a benefit for all partners that are included.
And it's a really good point, Chris.
If it's not very clear from the beginning, people will not cooperate, and it will this fail because people will not add enough information for it to make it actually viable, or it gets into the stage of who owns it actually, and is it really distributed, or are we talking about a database that is basically being handled by one big entity that owns everything?
Very, very good point, Chris, especially about you know, the buy-in, getting the supply chain on board. I mean, you've in my opinion, you've got to be coming with some sort of value proposition to the stakeholders in the supply chain to get them on board. So that could be lowering IT costs, it could be better efficiency. So, but you've got to translate that into real things that the supply chain can can understand. So, I mean, one of the things that I've said many times with blockchain is there's no such thing as my blockchain, in my opinion. No, it's our blockchain. It's about all of the participants and aligning that and getting buy-in from everyone and translating through a consortium what the value is to all of the stakeholders that are involved, and then they need alignment on what that value is as well. So it's more than just technology. Moving on, we've got another question from Shen. Is blockchain a data repository, or is there the possibility to integrate with various hard and software? There's definitely the possibility to integrate. In fact, I think we will see. I talked about cutting out overlapping IT, for example, but I think before we really realize that, we'll see situations where existing IT systems are sort of bolted on to blockchain systems. So we're talking about API integrations with blockchains in the early days, I think. But it's absolutely possible to integrate it. You agree, Chris?
Absolutely. I always say to my students, again, I'm a professor, blah blah. So people like to compare new technology to the old technology to try and make sense of it. I would say the blockchain is not a data repository, nor is it a network specifically. It's more of in between. So it's both a network of both database at the same time. But it's a database where we all hold a copy. So it's hard to make comparison. This is where a lot of the confusion also comes from. Is it a database? Is it a network? Well, it's a bit of both. It's something new. And the more integrations, because it's like a new network. Let's put it that way. Okay, so it's a new layer of networking. The more integrations you have with different software, with different hardware, the more powerful it becomes. So it wants to connect to as many hardware devices as possible to verify its information, to verify that it's actually true. And it wants to connect to as many different information sources to combine that all together into one source of truth, let's put it that way. So the more information you feed it, the more powerful it becomes. It is, however, also its Achilles heel in the other way around, because traditional systems have been built with the idea of efficiency and trying to reduce as much information to avoid duplicates. And blockchain does the opposite. It makes duplicates of everything. So the more information put into it, the heavier the system becomes, the more slow it becomes, the massive it becomes. And as a result, you cannot put too much information into it, otherwise the system gets overloaded. So
yeah.
Finding out what information I need to add to the system, what systems in hardware I need to integrate with the system, those are the interesting questions that you need to answer as SMEs, as partners in a conglomerate that the IT people can never figure out, because they have no idea. They will just add everything, and that's not the solution. So you have to be specific. What do I add? At what point, what information is actually relevant, and how I'm going to share that? Those are the central questions that you need to answer for them. And therefore, it's important that you also understand this technology and why we give this training, so that you can answer those questions correctly from the IT people. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, if everyone's okay with us running on just a touch longer, there's two more questions that we've got, Chris, which I'd like to address. Firstly, from Marco, is there one blockchain system / concept, or depending on requirements, various types of blockchains? Okay, a quick answer from me, there are very, very many different types of blockchains. Chris?
Yeah, hundreds.
Yeah.
Hundreds.
Yeah.
What we also see is specifically tailor-made systems for each chain. So the possibilities in that are quite limitless. What we do see is that they cooperate together. So if you build them well, they can even latch onto each other and use information, compound information with other chains to become even stronger, more intertwined. If that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a spider's web.
Yeah, so for example, a blockchain which is like assisting a textile supply chain would be a different blockchain system than the blockchain that's assisting a food supply chain, for example. And you know, it's a bit like saying, is there just one database in the world? No, there's thousands of them, maybe millions, and that's the kind of proliferation we'll probably see with blockchain as well. That there will be many blockchains which are applied to solving certain supply chain situations, currency situations, you name it. So there's many different types of systems. Last question. Which blockchain would you consider to be a better solution for supply chain track and chase, Ethereum or Hyperledger? Good, and why? I have my own feelings about this. Go on, you can go first for once, Chris.
Okay, so you're about to spark a very technical debate, and if you would ask this into a crowd of blockchain enthusiasts, I think you might have a small riot on your hands with people dividing into certain groups and trying to attack each other. It's like saying which programming language is the best solution to solve this problem. It depends on the case. So
it depends on the case.
It depends on the case. So to be more specific, right? So Ethereum, if you want to make sure that your program is to be able to be executed anywhere by anybody, regardless of being in your supply chain or not, then Ethereum is a better way to go compared to Hyperledger, because it's a more closed, let's say, more closed system where the network is separate. Can be, if depends on how you build Hyperledger specifically. It's a more closed system, so you need to ask permission to join, and you need to have permission to read it. That, at the same time, is also its advantage, I would say. So on the other side of that, if you do not want everybody to be able to read that information, but only certain partners within that chain to read that information, then maybe Hyperledger is the better choice here. But one of the cool thing here is that we can test a lot of these things, and that's why we have involved a lot of universities into these programs as well, that they can test different options for you, and they can say, okay, you should pick this one based on your needs and your specific implementation, or the other way around. So it really depends there. There's no hard yes or no. And there are a lot of people that disagree with me on that. They will say, no, this is the only way. But I would say to them is there's no one programming language to solve that one problem either. So why would there only be one blockchain to solve that one question either? So it's better to have an open mind and to be proven wrong than to say this is the only way and I will not discuss it any further. Yeah, that's my 2 cents. That's my way.
Yeah, and I generally align very much with what you're saying, Chris. I think the simple answer is it depends. It depends on I mean, for me, I think having a consortium of partners working together on what they're trying to achieve. I mean, it's so much more than technology. Having this consortium of partners based on what they're trying to achieve. If you're trying to achieve absolute, complete, full transparency within the whole supply chain, and unquestionably everything should just be fully open and public and transparent, then Ethereum is probably the best way to go. However, having said that, I personally, for supply chain situations, have a slight preference more for Hyperledger because of the permissioned technology that Chris just talked about. That you have more control, in my opinion, over access controls in Hyperledger about who can see what and who's allowed to come on board and do what and whatever. And I think because sometimes in supply chains there's that very sensitive nature of sometimes precisely not wanting to share information with certain stakeholders on the supply chain, then for me, I think Hyperledger is probably a little bit more positioned to assist with that, but it does depend on the use case.
Let us end, Geoff. Let us end with the link to the program that they can join.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly
because
what
there's a lot more. Okay, there's a lot more information that we can talk about and stuff like that. We really don't have the time. The programs can last as long as you want, but I have, I spend most of even a day to get general concepts to my students. So what you've just received already is a very quick version of trying to understand even the basic concepts of it. So I would really encourage you to apply to our program. It is free after all. It doesn't cost you anything but time. And I would also counter with time is money, but in this case, maybe time can give you money, so maybe a good investment for you. If you take the QR code, this is funded by the European Union amongst many. It is there to help you take advantage of this moment in time to get this information now. We have no incentive to push you any specific program. As I said, we said before, we don't even say that Ethereum or Hyperledger is the way to go. It's all up to you. Take a moment to take this advantage into your system, try to learn more, and to see if it's something for you to implement in the next, hopefully next year, upcoming year. Take this moment to really to hang on to this program. It's made for you, so please use it.
Just to wrap things up from my side, absolutely, please do consider joining the program. Scan the QR code and come on board, because we're here to help. Blockstart is made up of not just people of a technical discipline. I myself come from a software engineering background, but we also have business consultants on Blockstart. So we're covering the whole spectrum of getting Blockstart in meaningful ways implemented for SMEs.